out here chasing a feeling.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. This is your host, Tara Martini, along with Becky McNatten. We are glad to have you listening as we live and share stories of mental health.
You and I, Tara, get excited, I think, for every show we have. We talk about it every week.
Yep.
But today is specific because you and I love to talk about strategies and life integration.
Well, it's my favorite part of every show.
It is your favorite. And today we have an entire show dedicated to talking about applying the concept of boundaries to our everyday life. So last week we talked about what boundaries are and what they aren't. Mm-hmm. We talked about myths. So now that we have processed more fully what boundaries look like and how to conceptualize them, we can really think through how to set them. And a huge welcome to Robin Melville and Amanda Sullivan for joining us again this week on how to do this. So glad to have you two here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Everyone, I want each of you to weigh in on why boundaries are hard to set. Hard to set. And Terry, you go first. Why are they difficult for us to set?
It's funny because the minute you said, why are they hard to set, my whole body was like, oh.
Yeah.
I think because it involves having a voice. And I think for many people, possessing a voice is difficult because it's not natural for some of us. And so if it's not natural, then we have to pull it from somewhere, and it's a learned skill.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Amanda, what would you say? Why are they hard to set?
I think because often they create some sort of emotional reaction internally to setting a boundary, often guilt. And one thing I have noticed in my practice is that people do not like to feel guilty. That is an emotion a lot of people try to avoid.
Well said.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so if guilt is an emotion that you struggle with, what I tell people is I think that we need to work on how we feel more comfortable with feeling guilty, not try to make guilt go away.
That's makes a lot of sense. If something kind of, let's say guilt feels not good, guilt feels bad.
Yeah.
The goal isn't to not feel bad. The goal is to reckon with this idea of how do we tolerate or feel more comfortable with feeling that way.
Yep.
I love that thought. Robin, what would you say? Why are boundaries hard to set?
First, I think the fear of upsetting other people kind of like goes along with the guilt Amanda mentioned, but like wanting to be liked. So it's like if I say no, what are they going to think? And then also just like admitting to yourself where your limitations are of like, I will overcommit myself.
Absolutely see that.
And so then it's like, oh, I have overextended myself, and that's difficult to admit.
Yeah. Seeing the kind of personal and then choosing to do it. Not after the fact realizing, oh, that made me really tired, or doing it beforehand.
That's a great point.
And so it's a really big concept, but Tara, what would you say? How does our family of origin influence how we might set boundaries?
Well, like we talked about in the last episode, I think a lot of it has to do with the time period in which we grew up in and then our family of origin. So, Becky, you and I grew up in a time where boundaries weren't really a thing. It was the women of the household, really, you put forth everything. And not that I ever was taught, like, hey, do as you're told, be quiet. But as part of society, like, it was not, hey, women, have a strong voice, be independent. It was just that idea of like, hey, this is your place, in society. Be loving, be caring, give of oneself. And so although my family of origin was so loving and respectful among genders, it wasn't something to where I was taught or instilled within me to have super strong boundaries.
It was modeled for us.
You were taught to just coexist, right?
Totally.
And give of yourself.
Well, setting boundaries, everybody. This is what we're talking about today. It's a fascinating topic. Right now, we're going to take a short commercial break, but stay tuned as we dig deeper into how we can set meaningful boundaries in our life. Thank you for listening. We will be back in just a moment.
You gotta find.
I like that that's on video.
Express yourself.
Welcome Welcome back to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. I'm Tara Martini with Becky McNatten. Let's dive right back into our discussion.
On setting and sticking to boundaries.
Yes, girl, let's do that.
This already makes Tara laugh. I really love this discussion, everyone, because so much within the concept of boundaries is beyond what they are. It's beyond the content of actually what the boundary is. We're talking a lot about, and Amanda, you mentioned this, the emotional response that comes from it, or Robin, you mentioned the relational impact of what we receive back, or the worry of judgment. So today we're thinking about how we apply them and what it's like to both identify them, set them, and then thirdly, adhere to them, keep them.
Yeah.
Doing that is hard. And so I want to do a short review about boundaries. If you are a person that struggles with them, these statements might be tough to embrace. This is a little bit of a reflection on last week in our episode. I would love for you three to weigh in on these statements.
Sounds good.
I can say no to others without offering any explanation. What do you think about that?
Love it.
I love it, but that's hard.
Yeah. I
So
mean, I love
hard.
the concept.
But I think we're taught growing up to explain yourself.
Yeah.
It's never no, period.
Yeah.
It's no, and then you have to explain why the no.
Yeah.
Justify yourself.
And so if that caused a reaction for you, even with me saying it, I can say no to others without offering an explanation. Boundaries might be a struggle, which is what we talked about last week. The second statement, it's okay if people don't like me as a result of setting boundaries. And this was what you referenced even at the beginning. Why are they hard to set? What do you think about that statement, Robin?
That one is harder for me to agree with than the first one.
It's okay if people don't like me as a result of setting boundaries.
Yeah, that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yes.
I think most people would probably struggle with the idea of like, oh, that person doesn't like me. And it's okay if people don't like you, yes, but like it's a hard thing for us to accept.
Well, if we put a period after, so if you said, it's okay if people don't like me, period.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
People don't like that.
That is
Yeah.
startling.
Yeah.
And then add on, if I did something,
Which is,
Right.
and then that's the piece of, as a result of myself setting the boundaries.
yeah.
So I'm doing it to myself.
And we
No
can't
way.
say on this show that setting a boundary won't have that occur. Someone
Correct.
could decide, no, I don't like you as a result of setting a boundary. That's possible. And that's part of, I think, what you're referencing, and that being a tough thing to try to embrace. We don't like that. Tara, I'm going to ask you about the statement. I prioritize my own needs. This might be something who Tara just looked like she sniffed garbage just now.
Oh, because I think for myself, but also many people out there listening, I think prioritizing my own needs, I think it's that I have others' needs and then mine are like third, fourth, or fifth down the list. And that is how you show love, right? Is not honoring yourself and putting everyone else
Yes.
above yours.
Yes.
But learning that you can actually honor everyone else's and honor your own.
Right.
I think the and is important because I think, when we talk about the fact that maybe younger people now, I hear people say this a lot. I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. That's a bold statement. And I think that unfortunately, maybe there are, again, because of what we talked about last
Good
episode
point.
with social media and not enough nuance to these conversations. That is true in some situations. Like, yes, from a physical perspective, you should never have to engage in something
Right.
physically that you don't want to. But in relationships, there has to be compromise.
Absolutely.
So it's the both and of I prioritize my own needs, and sometimes I think about what other people need. And I think there's just this huge pendulum swing from like what you're saying about your generation to maybe how some people are focusing on boundaries now. And we do have to sometimes do things that we don't want to. There's limits to that, of course.
We do.
And how this
Absolutely.
conversation around boundaries is so different, maybe based on your age or based on kind of what you have seen as boundaries be kind of portrayed as in the media.
That's
Yeah.
a really
I think
good
that
point.
also connects to, like last week we mentioned how values determine boundaries. And so it's like, yeah, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, but what are your values? Because
Right.
if it's this relationship, then you might need to adjust.
Yeah. Yep. If relationships are important to you, you might have to yeah, go to go to a dinner that you maybe aren't super excited about because
Right.
it's someone's birthday and
Right.
something like that, you know.
Well, and I think it goes back to, it's the absolutes, right? Like, I don't ever have to do anything I don't want to. I think it also goes, and this is probably a whole other episode at looking at emotional intelligence of you set a boundary and then the person's like, well, we're never going to get along, or this is how it's always going to be. And like we talked about in the last episode, is that boundaries can be temporary, fluid, all of those things. And it's realizing that boundaries are there when they're needed.
Yeah.
And if they're not needed, they don't need to be put in place. But it's so they're there to protect and to be there when needed.
So, Robin, the last statement around kind of what are boundaries statement is sometimes it's necessary to say no when I want to say yes. Well, and what do you think about that statement?
That one's. Did you ask me for a reason? Because that one's the one that I struggle with. So I would say this one especially comes up in like social planning. Things you want to do.
Sure.
Yeah, all of it sounds great and fun.
Yeah.
But this is also like Amanda had mentioned on the last episode, is the internal boundary of like, where do I need to say no? Where do I need to draw the line? What do I need to do here to make sure I have enough rest and I can, keep eating healthy and like uphold the values that help me function? I can be someone that says yes when something sounds fun and exciting, and that if you do that too much, you can really easily head down the path of burnout.
Yeah. Well, and I know we're going to talk more about types of boundaries, but I think specifically this one with some situations with clients about like finances and money. And sometimes we want to do things that sound really fun, but from a financial perspective, like let's say someone wants to go on a trip.
Yep.
Do I have the financial capacity to do that? And so sometimes it is necessary to say no when I really want to say yes, like what Robin says. That sounds fun, but for whatever reason, whether it's rest or money or other commitments, we have to say no.
Yeah, great point. So what would you say then, Amanda, are some types of boundaries? You mentioned financial.
Yeah, so the kind of the ones that I think of are financial, which obviously has to do with how we're spending our money and making money, things like that. Emotional, so what am I willing to share or offer of myself? How vulnerable am I willing to be with you? How do I engage in conflict with you? Physical boundaries, which has a lot to do with physical touch, intimacy in relationships, those sorts of things. And then I think the other one is time. And I think time is one of the biggest ones that I talk with people about, is how am I spending time? Time is so finite. And how am I kind of deciding where my time needs to go?
Those all make so much sense. What thoughts do you two have to what she just shared?
I think energy goes along with time. Time and energy.
Yeah.
I agree.
And boundaries around how we are sharing or expending energy.
Right. So some days you might have the time, but you are done.
Right.
So it's like, no, I can't.
Yeah, sure.
Which maybe fits into like your emotional capacity and emotional boundary too. Yeah.
Well, and I think that one of the most universal things that therapists talk to, whether the client is grieving or going through transitions or just living life on a daily basis, is that idea of overexerting yourself and overscheduling, especially if you're trying to run a family, and being in all the places at once. It's that idea of, a lot of people think that's good, right? Doing all the things. But it's that idea of setting boundaries, and so that you are more present and aware. And the more you can do that, the more balance you're going to have and the more joy you're going to get from all the things. And so it's just so important. Like we said in the last episode, I think all of us use the word boundaries. I mean, if we kept a tally of how many times we say it in the office every day, because it is so important in every facet of our lives, whether it's business or personal. It's just,
well, as we just said, it could be emotional, it could be physical, it could be financial, it could be time, it could be energy, all sorts of things. And in our line of work, we use words like rigid. Sometimes we use the words porous around boundaries, and that would mean something more adaptive or flexible. And so as you think about all of those words we use as clinicians, what are the pros and cons of porous boundaries or rigid boundaries? Both of them.
Yeah.
Amanda, you look like you have thoughts.
Well, I always have thoughts.
That's good.
With rigid boundaries, kind of how I think about it is if you have a lot of rigid boundaries around like I'm always going to spend my time doing this and not doing this thing, is you might get a lot of like those internal needs met. So I might feel really good physically because I'm making a point to go to the gym every day. However, if I'm not engaging in social relationships because I'm becoming very rigid about my going to the gym,
Right.
I might feel that my relationships start to like take a like that they're not as the quality of my relationships changes because I'm also not prioritizing those or being flexible on the boundaries around how I'm spending my time.
Some aspects of your life might be missing out.
Yep.
And as a result, too, one of the things I was thinking about as you were speaking about, if you use the gym example and you're very rigid in your boundaries that you've set, is you may lose opportunities of, things, surprises that may happen, right? Unplanned things, beautiful things that would happen if they weren't so rigid. I think rigid has a negative connotation in it that where if we can be more flexible and allow ourselves to kind of have that, because I think it's important to have those boundaries, but also allowing that flexibility so that you're open to absorb other things.
And I think with Amanda's example of the gym, it's like boundaries can also bump up against each other.
Yeah.
What if you don't have energy one day, but you have that rigid boundary of, I still got to go to the gym?
Yes.
Good point. Yeah. Well, it makes me think about, I'm going to put you on the spot then since you brought that up. What is the difference between a boundary and a wall?
Well, I think boundaries, a healthy boundary is one that can be flexible to the context.
Opposite of rigid, then.
Right, yeah. Being able to understand, like, the value behind the boundary, I think helps determine, like, can help you determine where it can flex and where it needs to remain rigid. And a wall, I think, is just pretty immovable. That's kind of like, this is a decision and it's staying this way. Sounds kind of like a non-negotiable.
I like the analogy of a wall because I had this idea that we could think of our boundaries kind of as like different types of fences. So is our fence made of a straight up brick? Like you can't go across that boundary, or is it like there's a gate that I can go through in my fence? What's the fence made out of? Like again, how flexible is it, and how can I move? And what areas can I kind of change? Maybe what the boundaries are based on the situation.
I like that.
I love that. Do you think people, Amanda, have boundary styles?
Totally.
And what are they then? Like, would I have a different style than you?
I definitely think you and I have different boundaries.
Are you thankful for that, Amanda?
Well, it goes back to pros and cons. Like, I think that there are sometimes cons of the ways that I set boundaries, which maybe my boundaries can be a little bit like direct or come across like a little bit maybe abrasive to people sometimes. And maybe that there are relational consequences sometimes to that effect that I do just say, no, I'm not going to do that. And then maybe the other person is like left wondering like why I didn't want to do something, even though it's okay for me to do that.
But I also love the fact that you say, nope, I'm not going to do that. Rather than, well, because we talked about this, right? Rather than, nope, okay, let me explain why.
Well,
Because you don't have to.
Right. I don't have to, but sometimes the person or the situation also does warrant, I think, an explanation. Again, if it's my friend's birthday and they want me to come out to dinner,
Right.
I'm not just going to be like, no, I'm not coming to your birthday dinner. Like, I do feel like maybe I owe it to someone who's really important in my life to say, I actually have another commitment that night, or the place we're going for dinner, unfortunately, just like, I can't afford right now. It's not in my budget, or I have kids that I'm not able to get a sitter for, XYZ, because I want that person to still feel valued. And I maybe want to find another way to connect with them and celebrate their birthday.
That's a great point.
I hear you saying boundary styles might be inferred or impacted by our personality types.
Totally.
A boundary style is the modality in which we might be sharing or setting boundaries. And that is influenced by just our traits
Yeah.
and interests, but how you and I might share a boundary really different. Okay, so if we're looking to set boundaries, I want to talk together about steps we can take to do so. And I call this the 5 steps to boundary setting. Questions to ask when setting boundaries. So these are 5 things that I'm going to ask you all about what your thoughts are. And listeners, think about these 5 steps when you're setting, even recently when you've set boundaries, but certainly when you think about setting boundaries going forward. First, what is the context? Just think about what's happening around you. 2, ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Something like, am I comfortable with this situation? What's going on for me? 3, how close am I to the situation? And I mean, is this something that really matters to me? Number 4, what would I like to see as an outcome? And then 5, what are my options? So I want you to ask these 5 questions. What is the context? What am I feeling right now? How close am I to this situation? Does it really matter? What would I like to see as an outcome? And what are my options? What are everybody's thoughts? Tara, what are your thoughts?
I think so important to look at number 3 and 4 of, is this something that really matters to me? If this is something that's on your mind in the moment, but when you really reflect, you're like, meh, I don't really feel strongly about it, then maybe it's not worth establishing a strong boundary. But then also looking at, what would I like to see as an outcome? If you're just like, oh, I don't really need to change anything, like how it is right now, the status quo is fine. Those things are so telling in that then I don't need to proceed with creating that boundary. If, to go back to 3 and 4, is this something that really matters to me? And right away you're like, yes, this really matters to me. And it is a loud voice in your head saying that. And what would I like to see as an outcome? And you can so easily think of that. Then to me, the louder that voice inside your head, the stronger the boundary needs to be.
That's a really good point.
Why, thank you.
It would be a telling to ourselves in asking those. If you can identify them quickly and readily, and maybe even as you were talking, I noticed an intensity in how you were speaking. If there's a conviction behind what you'd like to see as an outcome, you have some clarity there.
Yep.
What are your thoughts, Amanda?
Well, I love these questions as a place to start reflecting, especially if boundaries are challenging for you, as kind of a starting point in setting boundaries. I think everything that Tara said is so true. And it goes back to, I think also, if it's a boundary within a relationship, again, it goes back to, how do I value this relationship and how do I communicate with this person, and try to, is there compromise that's possible, or how do we work through kind of these differences and boundaries together? And again, I think that goes back to asking the context and what do I want to see as outcomes.
Right.
There are some boundaries that maybe are much more important, and I think we're going to get to these in some examples, and other boundaries that are maybe the consequences would be much less, the intensity of the consequence would be less.
Right. That's part of what is the context right now. Is this an intense thing? Is this a representation of an intense thing? Is this a let it go kind of thing? Robin, what are your thoughts about the 5 steps?
I actually gravitated towards number 2. Checking
What
in
am I
on-
feeling right now?
Yeah. And made me think of when we discussed, rigid boundaries. I think sometimes people can identify a boundary and then, stick with that as that's my boundary. But like question number 1, context, and then also question number 2, because you might be feeling differently about something in this given situation. And so it's like knowing
Very good
how
point.
you feel in that moment to identify what you need.
That question helps decipher the uniqueness of the relationship, as you talked about last week, that they're individual kinds of relationships, and one relationship might need a different boundary. If we're asking ourselves in this moment, what am I feeling? That allows for the adaptation. I love that. We've asked ourselves questions to guide boundary making, those 5 questions. I want to look at language, because we spend a lot of time as therapists talking to people about language around setting boundaries, and the way in which we set them does have impact. If I yell a boundary at someone versus stating it calmly, that is going to be received differently.
Yes.
And so, some of the thoughts that I had around what language is best to set boundaries, things like directness, I statements. That would be that notation of number 2, question everybody, and how are you feeling right now? Rather than kind of making it about the other person, saying what you're feeling in that moment or saying what you need. And keep the focus on you in setting the boundary. Make the statements about your own needs versus what another person did.
Yes.
And we do this a lot as humans. We're like, you did this.
Yeah.
You started this thing. And
You made me feel this way.
Right. It's taking away
Yeah.
the action and taking away the blame. It is the biggest thing, and I say this with parents and when I work with families, is we already know the facts around everything. Like whether it's you broke curfew or you're always interrupting me. You take away that, and what you bring up is the way you made me feel. Because that's the important, and that's the deeper level that needs to be explored and addressed.
You know what I love about that too is they can't argue with that.
Correct.
You cannot argue with that.
Right. You can't. And it has a greater impact.
yeah, and I'm thinking about in the language of setting boundaries, women also tend to use this. We apologize either before or after the boundary. We say, I'm sorry, and we need to not do that. We need to not do that. Reserve an apology, and Tara and I did a whole episode on apologies. Reserve apologies for the space of apology. If you have thought about those 5 questions and there's a boundary there and you're stating it from a space of need, don't apologize for your need.
Right.
Start practicing that. You're nodding your head, Robin.
I think that when you add the sorry, you're kind of telling yourself you don't deserve to set the boundary, or you like you said, you have something to be sorry about, and it can almost take away from the boundary, just by communicating like uncertainty from yourself on setting it, feeling as though you aren't in the right spot to set it, like. Someone else could receive that as like, okay, they're sorry, it might get more pushback. It might not be taken seriously.
Right. And it might be a strategy we're using to try to absolve guilt that comes from having the boundary.
Right.
We need to, as Amanda said, learn what our relationship with guilt is versus tell ourselves that having the boundary was bad.
Well, it's apologizing for having a voice. Would you ever say that? Right? I apologize for having a voice, for sharing my feelings, right? Why would we apologize for taking care of ourselves?
Personal challenge here. So I'm going to put Amanda on the spot now.
Yes,
what
girl.
happens if somebody crosses the established boundary? What do we do? And what language do we use then? Because we're talking about that's a restatement of a boundary. And I think sometimes our fears about boundaries are they won't be met, or they won't be respected.
Yeah.
So what kind of language do we use when that happens?
Can we use that language on the radio?
I think this is such a great question, and you're gonna not hate, but be annoyed that my answer is gonna be like, it depends.
Well, we're talking about who is the person.
Yes, right.
Of course, I'm using a global question here. There's a lot of components to this that add complexity to it.
Well, so actually one of the things that I wrote as a starting step is to use the tool from one of your guys' first episodes, which is to practice compassionate curiosity.
I love that you're using one of our first episodes.
And if someone crosses a boundary, again, the situation is going to depend on how we respond. But if someone crosses a boundary, I think I would try to be curious about, was I not clear about what the boundary was? Why are you engaging, or like, why did you cross the boundary? Like, what was going on with you?
Love that.
Because I think that sometimes, I heard this from a client the other day, that they had set a boundary around someone communicating via text, and that person crossed the boundary. And when they were able to have a conversation about it, there had been some like things that had happened beforehand, which led to that, which they hadn't kind of communicated
Got
to that person around what had happened. And it really gave a lot of context to the situation, and they were able to kind of renegotiate going forward, like what that was going to look like. Another thing I talk with people a lot about when we're addressing conflict in relationships, like, it goes back to some of the questions you asked. How big of a deal is this? Is it a pattern? So I think that when people are continuously crossing our boundaries, that feels sometimes different than maybe it happened one time. But generally, this person has always done a really good job
Right.
at
And then-
honoring
but
my
then an
boundaries.
outlier
Yeah, an
happens.
outlier happens. So I think that what I would do is if a boundary had been crossed multiple times and I was really struggling with it and how it was affecting my relationship with this person, I would sit down and say, like, hey, can we talk about something? I'm feeling really anxious. I would name the feeling I'm having about bringing it up with them. Like, I want to have a conversation with, I've been feeling, I'm hoping that you're willing to do that with me, kind of being collaborative. And I think this is for any kind of conflict with a person that we're in.
Yeah.
And then sharing the way that I felt. I set this boundary with you. I felt like you weren't able to honor my boundary. Can you tell me more about what happened from your perspective?
I love all of that, and it makes me think about several things on approaching initially even ourselves with that kind of curiosity and what's going on for me, but then how to reiterate that. I want to take exactly what you just said and apply it to some scenarios, because these boundary sort of violations happen all the time.
Totally.
And you mentioned pattern, but I want to give some examples and ask you three how you would set a boundary or reiterate the boundary violation. What words might you use? And these are circumstances I've talked with people about in the last week. So I
wow.
picked things
Hey,
that are
yeah.
very recent.
Yeah.
And the first one is it's just a scenario, so that I'm not referencing a specific human here, but the
Okay.
scenario is my friend is getting married and I've told her that I can't afford to participate. She asked me to be in the wedding party and we were really close. I love her dearly, but I know what she is looking for around participation. There's a travel component for a bachelorette party, a few different showers with needed gifts, even the outfit for the day. But my friend keeps pushing against the boundary and asking me to be a bridesmaid over and over. So what language would you use in setting a boundary? Robin?
This is such a hard one.
Yeah, this is tough.
This is tough. Boundaries
Well,
are hard.
first, I suppose I would make sure to reiterate the boundary in the first place of like reminding them, I have this kind of financial boundary. I cannot afford all of these things. And then at that point, I think with this one specifically, I'd also want to have a conversation about like what things can I do and what things can we maybe opt out of? Like, do you need to attend multiple showers? Can I find a different dress? And that's kind of like working on where the boundary needs to fall between the both of them, since they're both involved and they, clearly have a positive relationship that they would want to keep. And I'm sure the bride wants her friend to be involved in some capacity. And so it's just kind of, I would say, having a discussion about like, where's the wiggle room in the boundary and the compromise.
And maybe, recognizing whatever feels that brings up for us about guilt or letting someone down or...
And just being honest about it. Like, I
but-
want to be there, but
But a boundary doesn't necessarily have to be as rigid as yes or no.
Right.
So I want to ask you an example, Tara. My family posts pictures of our gatherings online, and I don't want to be tagged. I'm a private person and don't like a large social media presence, but I don't get asked for my permission before they post things. So how would you set a boundary around this? My guess is this has happened to lots of people.
Yeah, I would imagine this is so common with the massive social media presence lately. I think it's so important because this sounds like, we talk about values in this episode and last. I think this comes down to the values of each person and that us, respecting that values may be different. And for one person who loves to share their families in a very public way, that is wonderful, but not everyone feels that way. And I think it's important not to assume and to respect the boundaries of other people. At the same time, it could be simply being that other person assumed you'd be okay with it. So it's important to have that voice without judgment in saying, I respect the idea that you love to post and all those things, but my family is more private. And so moving forward, I would appreciate if you could just not post my family. And I think that is, you're not accusing the family of anything. You're not blaming, because to me, there's a lack of judgment then if you say it that way, because you can acknowledge differences
Sure.
without judgment. But it's also important enough to where
Right.
making a direct statement of, moving forward, or even now, could you please take down the pictures of my family?
Yeah, well said.
And in the future, not post.
And your example of language gives some, as we said just a few minutes ago, being direct, being clear, using an I statement, focusing on the feelings that you have about the experience, nothing about keeping the focus on what your needs are.
Right. Yep.
And stating that. And if this were a pattern that comes up, you then get to practice what Amanda talked about, some curiosity around, tell me more about why you're posting these still. I had asked for you to not.
Yep.
Being curious, but the recognition that everyone gets to have different values too. That so much of what is at play in the setting them is value systems.
Right.
And even if they're family, in our families, we might have very different values from the people who are in a family with us.
And we don't have to understand someone else's, but we have to respect and acknowledge that they
Yeah.
could be different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Amanda, I want to give you a scenario.
Okay.
A boss asks their employee to be on call 24 hours a day for projects, and a person is being considered for a promotion and wants to seem like a team player. So they really want to show up for this stuff, but they're exhausted with 2 a.m. texts for things to be completed for the next day. So what might they do to set a boundary?
This is a great one. And I have an internal, my chest gets tight
Yep.
hearing this
Yeah.
because I'm like, this sounds like a very, what I would deem unhealthy work environment. I don't think that anyone should be asked to be on
I
call
was
24 hours a
the
day.
solution is you quit.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking too. There's that boundary.
Right. But again, if you want to set the boundary,
And also, this scenario, they might love what they're doing.
right.
This might be
Right.
something very
Yeah.
exciting.
Right.
That's a good point.
And in part, I included in the scenario,
Yeah.
sometimes we get asked to do things we really love. We
Yeah.
talked about in our last episode around needing to say no when we
Totally.
really want to say yes.
Well, and sometimes things we love can also have detrimental impacts to us.
Yes.
I think
Valid.
there's definitely been times in my life where it's I loved working, but the amount that I was working was not benefiting my mental health. And so I think that it's great that this person would be attuned to the fact that they're exhausted. I think I would, of course, try to sit down with my boss and just say, here's what I'm experiencing. And similar to the other kind of example of maybe inquiring about why 2 a.m. texts are necessary, and saying, can I respond to these texts, when I am awake at, 7 or 8 a.m.? Is that okay? Would that be, again, context of what the work environment is would matter a lot. Maybe sharing with your boss if you feel comfortable being emotionally vulnerable and sharing how it's impacting you, and just saying, because I'm up answering texts all day, don't feel like I'm rested and able to do my job well the next day. Where can we, kind of compromise on what this project needs, and how can we make sure that I'm showing up the best I can to be able to meet the needs of my job?
I think
If that person
boundaries-
doesn't want to quit.
If they don't want to quit.
I was going to say boundaries in the workplace is a topic that comes up a lot with clients, and it's I can't do that because I'm, afraid of losing my job, or there's going to be punishment. And
Yes.
so I think that's also where values need to come into play of
Right.
what's more important here. Do you love the job? Where are you willing to sacrifice? Or do you need to walk away?
And how willing are the people that you work with on working with you? If you have
Yes.
a boss who would come back and be very rigid about this is the expectation.
Yep.
Sometimes we have to make hard decisions about things, and whether or not it helps is fun now isn't necessarily what's best for us long term.
Great point.
Well said. So much to think about here. We are going to head to a commercial break right now, but when we come back, we're going to talk through listener questions around setting meaningful boundaries. Feels Out Loud will process your questions and thoughts in just a moment.
Then you'll find yourself. You gotta find the people.
We are back again with Feels Out Loud, and this part of the show is where we talk through questions from you all, our listeners. If you have a question related to mental wellness, sharing feelings, or topics for each week that you would like us to process through, please visit our website at becomingtogethermn.com and find the Feels Out Loud page to submit a question directly, or email us at contact@becomingtogethermn.com. Of course, follow us on social media as well. We really do want to hear from you and what you are wondering about.
We had a lot of questions today around
Yes, girl.
setting boundaries. And so clearly this is a thing that we've highlighted this in the show all day long, every day. But that is truly a struggle when we think about the complexity of relationships and the context in which the boundaries are occurring. One of our listeners asked us the question, how do I handle circumstances where other people's boundaries are different from mine? And Amanda, what would you say to this listener?
I think first, again, I said this, I think, earlier this episode or maybe last one, giving ourselves some time to reflect on why maybe I'm struggling with the fact that the boundaries are different. Is there something internally that it's bothering about
Sure.
like my own
Yeah.
life or my own difficulty with boundaries, and giving some space to reflect. I think also just trying to have clear and open communication with the people in your life. And I try to always, and Becky, you and I have talked about this, we try to be clear and direct with each other because we love and care about each other, right?
So important.
Not because we're wanting to end the relationship. It's because we care so much about the relationship. And so I think going into having conversations with people about boundaries and maybe how they're bothering us is just saying, I really want to talk about this because you're so important to me and because our relationship is so important.
Yeah, as you were talking, it made me think about one of the contexts that might have been occurring for those listeners. They were asking the question is the person whose boundaries are different from yours having an expectation of you around a boundary you set?
Oh, yeah.
Have you said, I can't talk about this right now? And they're saying, I need to talk about this right now.
Yeah.
And we're not sure because we don't know.
Right.
But a recognition that yours still get to be yours.
Yeah.
It was one of my first thoughts on how do you handle circumstances where they're different. I love your thoughts think about what's happening for you. And also that doesn't mean yours need to necessarily change and adapt. So Robin, our second listener, wondered, how can I support people in my life who are working on setting boundaries? And I loved this question because it's so often we think about people who push up against boundaries, but this person is really trying to help the person in their world set them.
Yeah, I like that because it's well, first I would say celebrate every time they do set a boundary with you.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah,
Yes.
like if you ask them to do something and they say no, celebrate that moment.
Yes.
Yeah, like
Celebrate the no.
Yeah, you just set a boundary with me, and that's amazing. And you know, sometimes with clients, I do that too. If we're working on setting boundaries, and they come in and share about a situation, and then they set a boundary of like, I don't want to talk about that today, or they kind of get to choose, and I'm like, look at you. You set that boundary. Like, way to go.
Yes. Well, it makes me think about even in a workplace, if this person is in a workplace where someone says, I took a day off to go do some things for myself. We get to choose our response to that and to choose, way to go, you, versus, well, that must have been nice to take a day for yourself. That if you are supporting people in your life to set boundaries, when you notice them being set, mark the moment.
Yes.
Highlight the moment that just happened and how powerful that was. And the more that we could do that with each other, the more we may move the needle around the experience of guilt for having set them as well.
Yeah.
If someone feels like I'm going to set a boundary and it will be received with love and compassion and maybe even a high five or a celebration, we probably are more apt to do the thing.
Right.
Positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
I would guess yes. We're at the end of our show already for today. Thank you everyone for listening this morning. Keep joining us as next week we talk about more emotion-focused topics, and in the week ahead, everyone, be kind to yourself. Remember that connection fosters wellness, and your voice is one that the world around you needs to hear. Share yourselves, friends.
Try again, some do